Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. We'll get started in just a moment. Just wanted to go over some upcoming events that we've got. So actually every Wednesday, we're going to be doing an iBasics session, and every Friday, we'll be doing a tips and tricks. So this coming Friday, we have checking your HMC firmware. And then December 9th, we'll have basics of libraries and the IFS. And then Friday, December 11th, we'll have what to know when switching to from physical tape to VTL. Then we'll be back with basics of printers, remote writers, and out queues, and then manage change and its impact on testing. We are going to take a short break for Christmas and the New Year, and then we'll be back January 6th. And we do have quite the lineup of iBasics, so definitely check those out, and you can sign up for updates. So if something's not open yet, then you're able to sign up and we'll notify you once it's open for registration. And with that, I'd like to introduce Stephen McIver.
Thank you, Vanessa. So yep, today we're kicking off this iBasics session with basics of IBM commands to help manage your system. And so with a lot of these commands that I'll teach you about today, they're going to certainly help you in your everyday time of administrating your IBM power system in IBM I. All right, so we're going to start this off with CL commands, and we're going to start at the basic level. So CL, it stands for command language, and so these are the commands that you're going to enter onto the command line whenever you're signed on to IBM I. Most commands, they include what's called parameters, and each parameter has a keyword, and it accepts one or more values into that keyword, into that parameter. And F4 is your best friend when using CL commands, because most CL commands have parameters that can be prompted, and that allows you to see some more information about what that parameter is about and what the different values are that you can actually put into that parameter. And there are often parameters that you can prompt with F4 to see the values that you can specify. And placing the cursor on a parameter and pressing F1 will give you the help text. And we're going to step through that, as that's a lot to present right there. So let's take an example of create user profile. So we're on IBM I, and from these screens, we're just at the main menu. So you're at the command line, you type in create user profile, and then you can press F4 in order to see all the different parameters from create user profile, which there are a lot of them. That's seen there on the right. So after you come up with a name for your user profile and a password, which is the first two parameters on create user profile, you decide that you want to set a user class for this user profile, but you're not sure what options that you have for a user class on the create user profile command. So you can place your cursor anywhere on the user class parameter, and you can press F4, which means you can, what's nice about prompting is that not only can you prompt CL commands, but you can also prompt even the parameters inside of it if there's the option for multiple values on it. So you'll notice that each of these values that are presented to you for the user class parameter have an asterisk next to them. And so the best way to think of these options that you have is that they're like constants. They have a predetermined value, putting asterisk user, asterisk sysopper, asterisk programmer. All of these have constant values that are set behind them. And if you put your cursor on any of these values and press F1, IBM I will actually give you more information, can give you that, if you're on a graphical interface, you might hover over it and get a tooltip. And with this, it gives you the help text. A lot of times at the top of the screen, you have the option of help and then getting the help text. Well, on IBM I, most of these CL commands have menus built into them to give you more information about how to use the command. So as often as you can, if you're not sure what the value does for a parameter inside of a CL command, put your cursor on it and press F1, and then you can scroll through it with page up and page down, and it'll give you a whole bunch of information about what that value will do inside that parameter. So after a lot of deliberation, you choose to use the value of sysopper so that this particular user that you're creating can manage jobs and back up the system. So with that, you type in *sysopper and press enter. And once you press enter, it inserts it into that parameter back on the original CL command of create user profile. And then pressing enter one more time runs the command, and create user profile recognizes you chose *sysopper for the user class. And as a result, it sets the user special authority to job control and save sys, as that's the values that are in behind that, that sysopper value. And then what does a generic mean? And so you'll see this as a usable value on many parameters. And simply what generic is that it's a wild card. So most time when you're using any other operating system, if you're searching for something and you put an asterisk after a string, it means that I want to search for something that begins with these letters, but I don't care what's after those letters, anything after that. And so whenever you see generic, it means you can wildcard, but it means you can only wildcard after the value and not before it. So in an example here with work device description, we've got the device description as PRT asterisk. And so that gets you all devices that begin with the letters PRT. And so unfortunately, when you have the option of generic, you can't put like asterisk PRT to get anything with letters before that and PRT after it. An example with this is that if you put PRT asterisk, then you're going to get all the printers in this example that begin with PRT. And examples of what you're not going to get is if it contains PRT in the middle of it or at the end of it, you won't get those, unfortunately. All right, and so then call Q command. So what's nice a lot of times is being able to copy and paste CL commands into the command line instead of having to key them out or prompt them and find all the different parameters. And I say hello to add license key, as it always has a significant number of parameters on it and is usually given to you in a big block. So the nice way to be able to copy and paste in large CL commands is to call Q command, and then you can press F11 and get an entire page of command lines to be able to paste that onto. So this is very handy, as you'll certainly get some long commands that are given to you. And if you want to easily put them onto the command line and run them, certainly having Q command and having a whole page will give you enough room to put that in. All right, so now we're going to move into all these commands now that you know some basics about how to put them on the command line, prompting them, finding out more information on them. We're going to start off with day-to-day management, and with those, we often use work act job, display system status, work with dis status, work with problems, and displaying the message queue for *sysopper, which always has a lot of useful information in it. So work active job, it lists all the active jobs on the system. It tells you the percentage of CPU that each job is consuming. It tells you the status of each job on the system, whether it's active or waiting for something. And then it allows you to manage the jobs. So you can hold a job to stop it from running if it's a process that you don't want to have running anymore. You can end a job if you no longer need it to run. You can work with the job to do things like view the job log to see what the job has been doing. And then you can respond to jobs that have inquiries. Oftentimes you'll see them as message wait, as the job is stalled and is waiting for you to tell what to do next. So you'll notice at the bottom of the work active job screen, if you just were to type work act job and press enter, that you have some extra options that are given with F23 and F24. And so, as you know, most keyboards nowadays only have the F keys 1 through 12. And there are some very old keyboards out there that still have all the F1 through F24 keys, but to access those keys on a newer keyboard, you just have to press Shift, which will add a value of 12 to that F key. So if you Shift F1, you're going to get an F13. If you Shift F2, you're going to get an F14. And so these extra options that you have on the screen with F23 and F24, you'll access them with Shift F11 and Shift F12 respectively. Pressing F24, you'll see an option F16 for resequence. And so if you go and put your cursor at the top of the CPU column and you press that Shift F4 for resequence, you can sequence the jobs on your system that are actively running in order from what's using the most CPU to the least. And then once you do that, you can use F10 on that screen to refresh that to see in real time what job is using the most CPU on the system. And because if you got one that's using a significant amount, from that point, you're going to start investigating, working with the job, looking at the job log, and trying to determine if it needs to keep running or if it's just kind of spinning in circles. So another useful option in Work Act Job is Find. And so by pressing F7, it brings up a Find window. And if you want to find all the jobs in the system with inquiries, jobs that are currently, they're active jobs, but they're waiting for you to respond to them to tell you what to do next. And so you can type in a message MSGW as the string for message wait on the string parameter, and then change the column parameter to status and press enter. And the work active job is going to show you all the jobs at the top that are in a message wait status. And at that point, you can take option 7 from that menu to display the message and decide how you want to respond to it. And not all jobs in message wait are requiring responses. Sometimes you'll take that option 7, it'll tell you that it doesn't need a response, and that's okay. But you always want to check this, if there's a job that normally shouldn't be in message wait that's in message wait, you want to display message and see what's going on with it. All right, and then display system status. And with this screen, you get the CPU and memory performance on one screen. You can view the database faults of each memory share pool. How much of the system ASP has been consumed, meaning how much storage do you have left to put objects on the system? How much temp storage is being used, and that's kind of like paging space, where it's using memory from your storage and not from the main memory. And how many users are signed on the system, batch job statuses, and jobs ended with printer output. So most users, when they do a display system status, will come to what they see on the screenshot below. And you can see the CPU and disk usage easily, and then memory share pool statistics are shown at the bottom. But if you're on that screen and you want to take a different view of it, you can press F21 or Shift F9, which will prompt you to change the assistance level. And if you choose the basic level, you'll see a very different version of the display status screen. And just keep in mind that there are many screens on IBMI where there are different assistance levels. And a lot of times changing that assistance level will actually change up the screen quite a bit and what's presented. This allows you to see more information about jobs on the system. So there on the right is also the display status screen, but on this one, it tells you a lot of other things about the system, like users that are signed on and jobs that are waiting for messages. And then paging down will show you the number of jobs ended with printer output waiting to print. If this number ever drastically changes, it's an indication that a process on the system may not be working properly. The process may be creating lots of jobs ending abnormally, which prints a job log. So it's always good to check on this number of jobs that are ended with printer output, as if it ever grows very quickly, a job may be stuck in a loop and creating output every time that it ends. So certainly one to keep an eye on. You may not check it every single day, but definitely keep an eye on it. Work disk status. So this allows you to view statistics about all the disk on your system, the amount of storage used on each disk, how busy the disks are, and the type of parity protection that's being used, as the disk may be in a disk array, and it'll let you know if maybe they're in a RAID 5 or RAID 6 or mirrored. It tells you how those disks are being protected. So with this, you want to make sure disks are not remaining more than 10% busy for an extended period of time. If you come into work disk status and you're refreshing in, especially if it's outside of a time when you're doing a backup, if it's just during normal production hours and those disks are more than 10% busy for an hour straight, it's probably a sign there's too few disk arms on the system or too little main memory on the system. If there's too little memory, it can also strain the disk, as it has to use more temp space, and which is going to use the disk. So make sure that the percent use column is balanced across all the disks of the same size. So if all your disks are the exact same size on your system, make sure that they're all balanced with the same amount of storage on them. If not, there's a handy IBMI command that you can use to balance that data. You don't ever want all of your most busy data stacked on one disk, as that'll definitely hurt performance. You want it to be able to be spread across all of them. And make sure your disk percent is not close to 100%, obviously. If your disks fill up on the system, it will stop running. So make sure that, best practice is to keep your storage on your system below 80%, and yeah, don't let it get close to 100%, simply. And then verify that parity protection is active for systems using internal disk. So systems using external disk or IBMI hosting iDisk almost always have parity protection already in place on the host side. So on your host system for IBMI hosting I, you'll have some kind of parity protection in place. And then on your client partitions that are receiving storage, or if you have a SAN that's already protecting that storage and then handing that to IBMI, you're just going to get the number of the auxiliary storage pool that it's in. So system operator message queue, you access it by doing a display message, and then you're going to specify that you want the QSysOper queue. And many of the important system messages get sent to this message queue. So things like expiring license keys, or hardware failures, or IBM software errors, these kind of things kind of default into the system operator message queue. It's always good to come out here and check. A lot of times you'll even see message waits that are out here for jobs. So always good to see what needs to get replied to, and then also see anything the system's trying to tell you. Sometimes this message queue can get kind of noisy if a lot of other applications are told to put messages in here. Outside of using the command line, though, it is nice to search the system operator message queue using a navigator for I, which is the web GUI for this, and you can search for specific strings in there if you're having a hard time kind of sorting through the noise, if there's a lot of applications talking inside the message queue as well. All right, so now we're going to get into the commands that you're going to use for PTFs, the OS version, and for checking the FSP or the server firmware. So we're going to talk about display PTF, work PTF group, work with image catalogs, the Go PTF menu, and display firmware status. Display PTF. So if you just type in display PTF and hit enter, you're going to get a screen with quite a bit of information on it. What's noted there by number one is the product ID. So when you hit display PTF, the first thing that pops up is the license internal code 5770999. And then by hitting enter, you're going to cycle through all the rest of the products. The next one, if you hit enter, would be for IBMI. And then after that, it's going to be for the other license programs that you have installed. Number two there shows you how you booted the system. And so if that ever says, for almost all the time, you're going to boot the system, and it's going to end with the letter B, which stands for the temporary side of the system, which includes both permanent and temporarily applied PTFs. And if it ever says that you're on the A side, it means you're on the side of the system that only has permanently applied PTFs. So if you're ever on the A side, you certainly want to take some time to boot the system onto the B side. And then option number three here is the release of the IBMI operating system. And this screenshot's V7R4, V7R4M0, which also equals IBMI 7.4. Number four on the screen here, the very top ID on this first page is going to show you, what the cumulative PTF level is on that system. And so it's kind of a quick way to see kind of what the latest cumulative package is that you've got installed on there. Number five is the status of the PTF, whether it's temporarily applied or temp or permanent. And then number six here is the IPL action. So whenever you install PTFs, some PTFs can be installed immediately, and other ones require an IPL in order to be applied. And so if that's the case, if it needs an IPL to apply, you'll have an IPL action in that column that says yes. So it's a good way to check, if you install a PTF and you know that it needs an IPL to apply, you can come in and take a look at it here on display PTF and make sure that IPL action is set to yes. And then work PTF group. So this is a really good way to check what level your PTF groups are for your various applications in the system and for IBMI. So by default, it shows the level of the current group installed and the previous group installed. And you can prompt out work PTF group, and you can tell it asterisk latest instead if you only want to see what the latest number is and not have 2 entries for every group out there. On it, you can press F11 to see names of the groups that make more sense. So instead of just having what the level is, you can hit F11 and it gives you the text of whether it's the cumulative or the hyper groups, which are groups of PTFs that have been found to be very important to get installed. You got your security, technology refresh, DB2 for IBMI, all those very important PTF groups. And so if you're on the screen and any of these PTF groups have a status of not installed, it's concerned to make sure that you get PTFs installed for that group. And it even gives you the option to show you what PTFs it found that were not installed. So work image catalog. So with doing PTFs, one of the most common ways to load PTFs is with using an image catalog. So it's a very important CL command you use a lot if you're loading PTFs this way. So it allows you to create an image catalog. It allows you to load that image catalog into a virtual optical for installing. It verifies the integrity of the files. It gives you a menu option for doing a verify, make sure that that package is good for a PTF or an OS upgrade. And then you can add or remove entries from the screen as well. And Go PTF. So Go PTF is a very popular menu for installing PTFs. And it just gives you all the tools that you need. Has a lot of, I can list out a dozen different PTF commands, or I can tell you to go to Go PTF and you can choose each of those commands individually. If you want to put in on one or a couple PTFs, you can use option 1 to load those PTFs and then option 2 to apply them. One of the most popular ways is to just load those PTFs into a catalog, or if you've downloaded them through the send PTF order, you can use option 8, which allows you to specify either service if you downloaded them through send PTF order, or specify the virtual optical that you've got loaded into with the image catalog. Just the one thing to be wary with always with Go PTF option 8 is to change automatic IPL to an N if you plan to delay install them. And by that I mean if you want to put them on now and then pick a time later to restart the system. If you do automatic IPL, leave it at Y, it will shut the system down as soon as it's done applying. So want to be wary of that if you're ever trying to put on PTFs during the day. All right, and display firmware status. So this allows you to check what the current firmware level is on the system, also known as the Flexible Service Processor, or FSP. The firmware update policy, if your update policy is set to OPSIS, it means that it's managed by IBMI itself. If you have an HMC attached, it means that the firmware for that system, you'll be updating it through the hardware management console instead. Most of the time, if you got a standalone system, it's OPSIS, and you're going to update that through an IBMI PTF, which does not come with your cumulative PTF package. You have to reach out and get that PTF on your own, or if you're a business partner here with iTech, we will certainly find that PTF and get it installed for you. With the HMC, you'll have to find the firmware package for it, and sometimes those those firmware updates with the that you can do through the HMC are non-disruptive. Other times they are disruptive. All partitions have to be shut down in order to put on that update. And then server IPL source, you always want to see temporary there. Of course, just like the PTFs on the system, you have temporary and permanent levels of the system firmware. And you always want to be run on temporary unless something happens, then you can use permanent to go back a level. And then it allows you to see what the update access key expiration date is. And so starting with Power 8 systems, there came about this update access key. And if that key is not up to date, you cannot update your system firmware. So you want to make sure that's always up to date. And it will stay up to date as long as you have your phone home option for IBM I configured. It will actually talk to IBM and get that key for you automatically put on. But if you ever come in here and see that that key is expired, certainly reach out to IBM to make sure that you do have maintenance in place for the system. If not, you need to repurchase it, or you may have to manually put on the key or get your system service set up so you can automatically get that key put on. So what went wrong is this whole section. You can use these commands to find out what happened with the job, why it went sideways. And those commands are work with the job, display the job log, work user job, display log, we're looking at the history log of the system, and go license program option 50, which is a subset of display log. Kind of takes out all the rest of the noise if you're wanting to see what happened during LOS upgrade or PTF install. And then again, just throwing in display message queue sysoper, sometimes will have some useful information for you. So work job, with the default parameters, if you just put in work job and hit enter, you'll learn everything you need to know about your current running job. So what subsystem is it running in? What's happening in the job log? Which libraries are in the library list? What programs are running in the call stack? What objects are being locked by the job? What priority is the job running with? And so on and so on. Lots of different attributes that it shows you about the job. And so with that, you can prompt it with F4. You can fill in a different job and username and number to analyze another job. An example of this, you might go into QSysOper and you see that there's maybe a job that's been wrapping. And usually when you see a job that's been wrapping, it's something that's right into the job log a lot. And not always is it a bad thing. Sometimes jobs just write a lot into the job log. Other times it may be a job that doesn't normally do that, but is doing it today. And you may wonder, I wonder what that job's doing. You can go into the message, you can find out what the job name, user, and number is, do a work job on it, take a look at the job log, and you may find that it's in a continuous loop. So it's a way to kind of see what's going on and see if something bad is going on, and hold that job, end it, fix it, and have it run again and run properly. Display job log. So if you type in display job log and hit enter, it's just a quick way to get into your own job log. So if you're running some interactive commands on your session, and when I say interactive, it's always good to stop there. So if you're running a job interactively, kind of what we've been talking about this entire time is running commands on the command line. And each time we've just been entering them straight into the command line. And that's what's known as running it interactively. And so if you want to run something instead in batch, those jobs get submitted to batch through a command called submit job. And those are jobs that kind of run in the background in a batch process. And those will get entered under a different job number. So if you submit something to batch and hit work job, you're just going to get the information for your current session, not for that other job that you submitted. So when you do the submit job, you'd have to look in your job log and get the information of that job you submitted and then do a work job on that. And so once you come into display job log, you can press F10 and then press F16 or F18, sorry, to go down to the bottom of the page and see the most recent entries inside the job log. And work user job. So with default parameters, it shows you the status of all active jobs or jobs ended with output that are running or ran as your user profile. And so if you want to look at the jobs that a specific user is running, you prompt that command with F4 and put in the user's profile and the user whose job's the display parameter. And if that user is running the job interactively, if you know it's they're signed in on a 5250 green screen, then you can subset by interactive jobs by using the value interact on the job type parameter. So it's kind of an example of that. So if I wanted to display only jobs by user iTech SOL that were active and they were just connected interactively, it doesn't have to be green screen. Sometimes users are able to connect to a session through kind of a screen scraping type of interface. But if they're connected interactively, not through another method, then you can subset it by that job type and see only those interactive jobs that they're connected to the system by. And that's a great way if you got a user that's having a problem on the system. Well, you can do work user, ask them what their profile is, put that in there, and find that job that they're using on the system. Just do a 5 on it without having to do a work job and enter in that information. All right, so display log. So display log displays the system history log. With no prompting, it shows you the history of the current day. And you prompt it with F4 to specify specific things like the day and the time, the day that happened, or you can do a range of dates, you can do a range of time. If you know a problem happened on a certain day at a certain time of the day, then you can specify that range to kind of zoom in on it. When you know a problem happened at a specific time, you can see what's happening around that time. If you know the ID of the message you're looking for, so if it's a CPF ID or any kind of prefix and number, it's got a certain ID that's attached to the message you saw on it, you can search by that message ID, which will certainly help filter things down when you're looking through the history log of the system. And just a couple screenshots of it right here. When it's asking for a beginning time and date, the syntax, the format that is one is for the time is one. The first 2 is hours, the second 2 is minutes, the second 2 is minutes, the third set is seconds, and then it wants the beginning date, which is notated by month and day, and then year. I think even year you just have to have 2 digits, but you can also put in 4 digits as well for that. As an example of how you can put in the time and date. And then once you have the history log pulled up on any of the entries, you'll just put your cursor on top of any of them and press F1, and you get more details about that entry in the history log. All right, go license program option 50. So this is just a menu option for display log, but it subsets it to where it's only going to show you messages about PTFs and an OS upgrade. So anything that pertains to licensed programs, and of course those get touched during PTF updates and OS upgrades. So a great way to see that, make sure that everything was installed successfully, or if there is any issue, it'll give you more information there. All right, so powering down or restarting the system, and these are very useful commands and essential commands for powering down and restarting. NTCP, N subsystems, change IPLA for change IPL attributes, and then power down sys. So NTCP, you want to issue this after nicely closing all running applications. So when you go to restart your system or shut it down, you ideally want to use the proper commands to end your applications. Pretty much all applications should have a way to end the application, making sure that things get written where they need to before the application closes. And then once you've got that done, issue NTCP, and this is going to end network communications on your system. And this is a good thing to do before ending subsystems, as sometimes going to end the subsystems can take a significant amount of time if TCP is not ended beforehand. So once you run NTCP and all those TCP/IP processes have ended, then you want to issue end subsystem, and with that you want to add some additional values to that. With end subsystems, you want to make sure you end them all. If all of your applications have already been ended nicely, then you'll issue the IMED value with it as well. So when you type in end subsystem *all *IMED, then that's going to end all the subsystems and bring the system to what's called a restricted state. And in order to verify that your system has achieved the restricted state, You can do work subsystem and just refresh it every so often until that message shows up at the bottom. Or you can display message queue sysopper, and eventually you'll get a message in it telling you that the system has ended to restricted condition. At that time, you know that you're good to go ahead and restart or shut down the system in order to achieve a normal IPL, and as opposed to abnormal IPL whenever it's coming back up. And change IPL attributes. And this is used to change the attributes of an IPL. Prompting with F4 will show a number of attributes that can be changed. And the most useful that, there's a lot of different parameters on here. We're not going to cover all of them right now, but one of the most useful things that you can use on change IPL attributes is to change the system to start in a restricted state. And so sometimes you'll have a scenario where you don't want the system to immediately start up upon restarting the system. Sometimes you want to leave it in restricted state to do something. You may need to reorganize some files after you restart it, or you may need to do the save after you have started it back up. So it gives you the option to where if you want to restart the system but don't want everything to start firing when it starts up, you can tell it to be in restricted state when it comes up. A nice thing about that parameter is that if you do set it to yes, then after the next IPL, then it automatically reverts back to being no. So you don't forget about it, and then some scheduled IPL happens and the system stays down. So it kind of keeps you from shooting yourself in the foot. And then the power down sys command, which is used to turn off or restart the system. And you want to execute this after the system is in restricted state, ideally. I mean, you can tell it to end control and set by default, if you just hit power down sys and hit enter, then it won't power down for an hour. It delays for 3,600 seconds, which is an hour, and no one really wants to wait around that long. So ideally, you get the system shut down nicely, any applications using the previous commands we mentioned, and then you'll tell it to end immediately. And then on the restart after power down, if you say no, then it's going to shut the system down or this partition. And then if you want to restart the system, make sure you change it to yes so that it will restart. Okay, and now we're going to cover some commands that are useful for security. So we have work user profile for working, has everything you need for working with user profiles. Grant object authority if you want to give authority to something. Revoke object authority if you want to take it away. You got change authority for changing authority, and that's specifically for IFS objects, and also you can also use it for other objects as well. Change ownership for changing who owns the object, and then working with authorization lists. So work user profile, if you just do work user profile and you tell it that you want to work with all profiles, and it's going to list every single profile on the system. And option 2 from this menu lets you change any of the attributes on the user profile, granted that you have the authority to do so. And then option 3 on this menu allows you to copy a profile, and copy is a very useful feature. So if you get a new admin at your company, you can copy a current admin and just change the name and update the description on it, and there you go, you got a new profile. If you got a new person on your help desk, you can copy someone's profile who's on the help desk, and suddenly they got all the same authorities, and then just update the description, and it just is that easy sometimes to add a profile. Grant object authority. So this is a powerful command for adding or changing authority to one or many objects. So an example of this is you may decide that public doesn't need write access to a sensitive library. So you could run the following to only let public have read and execute, also known as use authority, access to the library. So to change the public authority on a library object, there's an example CL right there, or it's going to say the object's sensitive is the name of the library, and tell it to have public only use authority of only read and execute, so no writing to it. And then changing the public authority for all objects in the library. So the next grant object authority, it selects all objects that are in the sensitive library of any object type, and then it sets the user public to use. So that's going to, you run that command, and it's going to select all those objects in there and change that very, very quickly. It's a very quick command to run if you're wanting to update authority very quickly. And then you have revoke object authority, and this is used for taking that authority away. If you suddenly don't want a particular user or a group of users to have access to objects. So an example of this is removing authority for profile IT group from a library object. So you got your library object sensitive, and that example right there is just taking away that authority from it. That user had change authority to it, and it just it takes the change authority away for that user, so they don't have that extra authority to it. So then to remove the authority for all the objects in there, then it's just a matter of specifying the name of the library and all objects in it, and which authority that you want to take away from that group or individual user. And then we got change authority, and this is for add. It's used for add, change, or remove authority for one or many objects on the system. And this one is primarily used for authority for IFS objects. So if you need to change a whole directories worth, you can change one single link in IFS, or you can change a whole directories and all of the directories under its authorities. You definitely want to be careful when you're measuring out this one. Make sure you run it on the directory that you want to run it on, not run it on a wider scope than you expect. So for this example, if you're wanting to remove public authority for a directory and every object and directory under it, then you can put in / the name of the directory, use public, and then say that you want that the data authority to be none for that user for subtree all. And whenever you do subtree all, it means that it would do / directory. Any folder that comes under that / directory is also going to have that applied to it as well. And change own. And so this one is set up like it's only for IFS, but this is actually a command that's also useful for objects in the QSys file system. So it's used to change object ownership of one or many objects on the system. It's a great, and as I was saying, great tool for both of them. So an example of this, and for both instances, if you had a library and you wanted to change the object ownership of the library and all the objects in it, then you'd run a change own on, and you'll see there where it says qsys.lib sensitive.lib. So all libraries in the system are nested under a library called qsys. So if you're using this command, you have to make sure to scoot that out of the way. You have to make sure that you put qsys first, and then the name of the library with the lib file extension, and then set the new owner to whoever you want the owner to be, in this case payroll, and then subtree all just covers the library object in it and all the objects that are inside of it. And if you want to change the ownership of a directory and all objects and directories under it, then the example is doing / directory, specifying the new owner and saying subtree all. And work with authorization lists. So this is used to add, change, or delete authorization lists. Authorization lists are preferred over group profiles for securing objects on systems with hundreds of thousands to multiple millions of objects. And so how can you secure using an authorization list? Well, you start by creating one as the first step, which you can use the work authorization list and using the create option. And then you have to add users or groups to that authorization list. Also, along with that, you can authorize certain users to be able to modify that list, or no one. You may have just one person that can modify it. And then the previous commands we just mentioned, you can use to add, remove, or change authorization list attached to the object. What's nice is that with an authorization list, you can put a public authority on it. So if you wanted public to be excluded and you attach an authorization list to an object, you can set the authority of public to a value called asterisk AUTL, and then that's going to use it's going to determine the public authority by what's the public authority is set to on the authorization list. So really great way to secure objects once you get to the point of having lots and lots and lots of them on the system. So backup and restore. I'm going to cover all these commands. I'll try to go over them fairly quickly. We got work config status, which allows you to see the status of, say your tape drive or optical drive. Save object for saving objects, save libraries, the save command, restore object, restore library, restore, and then we got go save, which is a great menu for backing up the system. So work config status, great command for checking devices if they're varied on and available to use. If you do a work config status and you specify asterisk tape for the configuration description, then it's going to show you the status of all tape devices on your system. So if you're not sure what the name of your tape device is, you can just run that and specify asterisk tape, and you'll find everything that's on the system configured. Then save object. So if you want to save one or more objects, it's a great command to use. You can specify a hardware device to save to, or if you create a save file, you can save to a save file, which is kind of like a zip file from other, not exactly the same, but sort of like a zip file from other systems. And then many parameters to consider on this, but picture to the right is an example of performing a save on a single object where you put saved object, you prompted it with F4, and then you just tell it the name of the object, the library it's in, the tape device in this example, and then the object type, just if you want to be specific, if there's other objects in there called ABC, it's going to save all of them by default. If you want just the file, you can specify that in the object type. Save live, very similar. This lets you save an entire library, specify your device that you want to use there, and again, just a quick example there to the right. Pretty simple on save live. Then you have the command save, and this is primarily used for saving IFS objects, but it can also be used for saving libraries in QSys as well. The tricky part of using it, kind of like on the change zone command, is that you have to specifying the device correctly. So again, there's many parameters to consider. Here's an example of saving an IFS directory where you see the device. Instead of simply being able to put tape01, we have to put qsys.lib tape01.deb. The reason being that is that device descriptions are all inside of the qsys library, and then you have to have the file extension of .devd after it. So that's the way you have to list it there. And then that's just simply saying to save a directory called directory. And then an example of using a save file is that then you have to specify the qsys.lib, then you have to specify the library that the save file is in, and then you have to specify the name of the save file .savf. So getting that device correctly for saving to a save file is definitely very tricky. So definitely keep this example handy if you're wanting to use save to save anything. And restore object, it's used to restore one or more objects, just very similar to save object, but restoring, putting it back on the system. You can specify the hardware device or the save file to restore from. And just a quick example there on the right. Restore live, much like save live, just got two required parameters there, the saved library or the device, and many parameters to consider on it. So make sure you review them all before. And very similar to save, you have restore, and again, tricky on specifying that correct device on it. And then just make sure you check all the parameters on the restore to make sure you're putting that object back in the correct place. go save option 21. So this is the tried and true method for obtaining a full save on your system. You run the command from the system console. So in order to get there, on the command line, you'll type in go space save and press enter. You'll be presented with a lot of different options on that screen. Option 21 is the one for saving the entire system. It requires the system to be in a restricted state for the full duration. So option 21 isn't the best for all customers. Some customers can't stand any downtime. And so if your system takes 10 hours to back up, you're not going to use option 21 to shut your system down for 10 hours unless it was absolutely necessary. And so there are other options out there for getting the system backed up. And that is out of the scope of today's session, but there are options outside of using option 21 for getting your full save. So then make sure spool file data is set to all if you want to truly get a full save of the system, making sure that, because you have the option to not save spool file data, you want to make sure it is set to all on it. And then if you've already brought the system to a restricted state before starting it, then you can just set the end TCP/IP wait time to none. By default, even if you've already got the system in restricted state, it's going to spend 5 minutes putting the system in restricted state before ending. So a way to save a few minutes is to change that to none before you execute the command. All right, so then just a quick couple screens of go save 21 showing saving the tape01 and making sure that all spool files are on there, none for end TCP/IP. Then the last one you got there, start controlling subsystem. And that's a new one for IBM i7-4. So if you got that set to N, then that'll not start the controlling subsystem. You'll actually stay in restricted state. And if you wanted to IPL the system at that point, then there's nothing else that you have to shut down. Managing TCP/IP communications. Yeah, so we're going to run out of time for the printers portion of this, but we'll quickly hit these, and then we'll see what questions you got after this. Work with line descriptions. It allows you to check the status of line descriptions, check to see which physical resource they're attached to, and this is for your Ethernet communications. This will allow you to see which physical port on the system that these are connected to, the resource name kind of being a logical name. You have to work with hardware resources on the system to see where that, in this example, CMN03 is physically attached to. But this gives you an idea of what resource is being used for the Ethernet line. Config TCP, and this provides a menu to manage TCP/IP communications. This is one that you'll be using quite a bit for you to manage any of your TCP/IP communications on IBM I. So it gives you a lot of menu options, which we'll see here in a second. Add, change, remove, start, stop TCP/IP interfaces. Add, remove, or change TCP/IP routes. Modify the host table entries. Change the TCP/IP domain information. So you define a host name, define what the domain name is, define DNS servers for it to resolve names with. And then configure TCP/IP applications like SMTP for mail, NTP for network time. And an example of what the config TCP/IP menu looks like, you have an option on there for, looks like option 20 there's for applications, and that's the one that's shown in the lower right, which allows you to configure lots of different applications on the system. And we have netstat. Netstat's used to check the status of interfaces, as well as start and stop them like you can do in config TCP. And in addition to that, you can display the routing table. You can determine if you've got a route in place for your traffic to be able to go to. You can check to see which services are up and running and learn more details about remote connections being made to the system. And you can even subset remote connections being made by a specific port. An example of this, if you wanted to subset the telnet connections being made to your system, you can take netstat option 3. You can use the F15 option, and you can change the local port range value to 23, and that's the default port for telnet, 23, and hit enter. And you'll see anyone that's made a telnet connection to your system This is useful if you're wanting to enable secure telnet for your system. If you still got users that are connecting on port 23, you can then find them and reach out to them and assist them in using the secure option to connect to the system. All right, so yeah, we won't have time for the managing printers section, but included here are some very useful commands for managing printers on your system. So we're going to skip all the way past that, and we're going to let's see if we got any questions out there.
All right, we do have some questions. So seeing two CUME PTFs or hardware related PTF, is it a good practice to keep one and not both levels?
Not sure if I understand that question there.
Can you pop it out and see if maybe I'm reading it wrong? Can you see it, Stephen?
Yeah, I'm seeing if I can pop out that so I can read it. Yeah, there we go. Seeing two CUME PTFs or hardware related PTFs.
So
I think you'll see two levels, but yeah, it's not harmful to have both the levels there. It's just going to show what your previous level was and what your current level of the PTF is. So yeah, don't remove them. Just keep those listed there when you're looking at, like, say, work PTF group.
Okay. Do you need an IPL to permanently apply PTFs?
To apply all PTFs, yes. So some PTFs don't require an IPL to permanently apply, but some do require an IPL. So in order to apply them all, then yes, an IPL is required.
Okay. So this one has some, I don't know if you can see the next one, Pete or Stephen.
For change own?
Yes.
Yeah, for change own, you can also use work object own and change multiple objects at a time.
Oh.
Yeah, so I think we want to answer the questions versus the statements.
Yep, that's good information to know. Thank you, Tim. And then go hardware option 1 for check the communication resource. And then I notice I have a lot of objects as end with printer output waiting to be printed. What is the out queue I should be looking for? And a lot of times the main offender is, or where they usually get put, is in Q, E as in Edward, Z as in Zulu, job log. So you can also just do a work out queue space * all and add a bird's eye view, see the number of spool files in each output queue. But usually they're sitting in QZ job log. But if you see a lot of jobs ended with output, certainly look at all your output queues and see where there's some cleanup that may be necessary.
Okay, and yes, the slides will be available. We'll send that out this afternoon. Is there an authorization list option for IFS security?
Yes, you can secure objects in the IFS using an authorization list.
Okay, that appears to be it. Oh, here comes another one. If the command to stop a subsystem is entered, will the jobs active in that subsystem first run to completion before the system is stopped?
No. Well, if you tell a subsystem to end and you tell it to end immediately, it's going to not nicely end that subsystem. So if you got a process that you want to complete normally, make sure that it's got data that's floating out there, get written into the file before it gets ended. Make sure you end the application first, or you may just end it controlled and set it as a significant amount of time for it to gently end that subsystem.
Okay. Well, thank you, Stephen. And thanks everyone for joining us today. We'll be sending out the recording and the slides, and we'll see you soon.
All right, it's a pleasure. Talk to you again soon.